Hi everyone, welcome back. This lecture is going to be discussing the neurophysiology of compassion. Why are we interested in the neurophysiology of compassion? Well, first we know that people are compassionate and that it's important in their mental health, as well as in the ways in which counseling can allow one person to provide support to another. We also know that the lack of compassion in some situations can be destructive and can lead to mental health problems. We know that mindfulness has been associated with the development of compassion. We could say it's been naturally associated. In other words, if one does the meditation technique called mindfulness that we've studied extensively, then compassion is one of the outcomes or the products of that practice. And that is partly a result of mindfulness helping the user to accept painful and pleasurable experiences without resistance. That emphasis on being with the experience as it is, without judgment. But compassion does go beyond this in actions to help the person experiencing pain become free of pain through active soothing. In traditional Buddhist meditation training, peacemaking extends to unconditional friendliness to self, including unconditional forgiveness of the self. So not just being a friend to yourself, but also being willing to give yourself a break, to forgive yourself when you make a mistake, and follow with that mindful practice of acknowledging and letting go. So one of these relates to the self as if it's another person, where you actively soothe oneself, and it suggests two sides to the self. In a way, an active soothing side that helps the distressed side to become calmer and let go of their distress. Imagine the calmer older sibling or parent voice within yourself speaking to the voice within yourself that needs help at the moment. And one is basically relating to oneself with empathic resources, sort of reparenting yourself, reliving painful historical moments, but meeting those challenges with the simultaneous support and soothing from self-compassion. We can understand this as two locations or processes within the brain interacting in such a way that the overall experience of a person is becoming calmer, more functional, more able to keep going with your day or to overcome these challenges. So when this is found to be effective within a person, the same process can be extended to others. And this is a statement, so to speak, of intention to do so, of unconditional friendliness. May all sentient beings enjoy happiness and the root of happiness, be free from suffering and the root of suffering. May they not be separated from the great happiness devoid of suffering, and may they dwell in the great equanimity, free from passion, aggression, and prejudice. So this soothing attitude and activity includes appreciating one's negative moods as you realize that each can be learned from. So here's an example of that kind of appreciation in a phrase. That if you don't know the nature of fear, you'll never know fearlessness. And the basic point of this is to say that knowing states of suffering instead of avoiding them results in skill development that helps to transform them into positive states of well-being. So this relatively fearless, non-avoidant approach to life can be encapsulated in a meditation practice when you express compassion. So this is the active transformation of suffering by taking in and sending out. And by taking in as you breathe in and breathing out, sending it out, that pattern in the breath is reflected in the empathic process by taking in another person's suffering, not avoiding the feeling of negativity, and sending out empathy, the goodness, support, help, and trying to use this to deliver healing, where you're actively helping a person to become healthier and feel healthier. Now, all of this involves activating and using specific parts of the brain in a voluntary, self-controlled, focused way. If we can track the activation and functioning of the parts of the brain that are involved, we can develop more objective understandings and measurements of states that were previously only subjectively defined and measured. Therefore, there is value in understanding the neurophysiology of compassion. So that's to say how the brain operates as a body organ when compassion is happening. Exactly where in the brain, how in the brain, what are the systems that become most active when we're demonstrating this kind of behavior. So ultimately, we wanted to develop multiple forms of training that change the brain in positive ways to increase your ability to offer compassion to yourself and to others. And as we begin looking at this brain neurophysiology, it helps to realize it's a lot like studying planetary geography and cultural activity on Earth. We locate a place on Earth like the city of Toronto, and we observe what's happening in that place. There's place, and then there's a definition and measurement of activity, simplified as what's happening where. And fortunately, we have some instruments like the functional MRI or fMRI that can provide a window into the brain and help us understand what's happening where, what brain metabolism, what energetic interactions are happening in which parts of the brain. So this process was developed by a researcher named Wendy Hassenkamp, who used fMRI to examine meditation. She broke meditation down to a process of responding to mind wandering by shifting attention from wandering to sensations of breathing. So within this, there were 4 steps. First, the engagement in mind wandering, followed by becoming aware of the mind wandering, shifting attention away from the mind wandering back towards the breathing sensation, and then finally sustaining attention on the breathing sensation until once again you realize that you've engaged in mind wandering. And we know that process is typical and it's non-pejorative, that you shouldn't castigate yourself each time your mind wanders because it's inherent to the process of meditation. So this 4-step process is tracked on the fMRI as long as we accommodate one of its limitations, that it runs using pulses that last for 3 seconds. So this measurement has to be structured in 3-second blocks of time. That's how long it takes to assess the metabolic activity in a specific sector. Now we realize when picking the place where a happening is going on, so to speak, that the place might actually be, in fact, a network of places where these occurrences are. It's a bit like defining Toronto as a big city, but also noting that other big city places like Vancouver, Montreal, Ottawa comprise a network of large cities where coordinated activities occur. And we can look at the pathways that link these nodes together. Now this describes the default mode network, where similar activities occur in about 6 different brain locales, each of which has a Latin name using words designed to describe where that place is in the brain. You don't need to memorize exactly what these names are, but you need to know that there are about 6 in the default mode network. So the medial prefrontal cortex, posterior cingulate cortex, precuneus, inferior parietal lobe, lateral temporal cortices, and the parahippocampal cortex. Now, the default mode network in depression is particularly interesting because it seems to govern the activity we revert to when we are not trying to do anything specific, when we're not focusing attention in a functional way. And it's also interesting because when people become depressed, it seems that they get stuck in the default mode network. In other words, they keep firing the default mode neurons in a prolonged dysfunctional way. And when we have an objective finding like this helps us to better understand how to counteract and treat depression. The term used in this slide is downregulation or downregulating of DMN activity, And the internal emotional states involved are self-referential processing, so thinking about yourself, and especially during rumination and worry. And there's a common phrase that you need to get out of your own head and focus on something other than your own experience in order to break out of this default mode. Now, this is related to the relationship between the default mode network and another network, which is unsurprisingly called the executive network, which is what's activated when you focus on a task outside your own head, not just dwelling on your own thoughts. And furthermore, this brings together observations related to the neurotransmitter GABA, which is a neuroinhibitory transmitter activated during mindfulness. So this may be another reflection that mindfulness can help lead to a focus external to your mind, external to your own thoughts. And deficits in GABA inhibitory signals at the cellular level underlie shifts in resting state activities in the DMN and the executive network, translated as excessive focusing on internal mental versus external environmental content. So that excess in internal thoughts, because the GABA signals, which would otherwise be pressuring those down, inhibiting it, those signals are not strong enough. And so this gets reflected in the predominance of this self-focused cognition and rumination. So the key takeaways from the next couple of slides are that researchers are still trying to put all of this together, but we are making progress. Now those arrows point at the areas that are of most importance to us for now, namely the shift from the internal awareness to external awareness, and the shift from self-referential awareness to environmental focus. Now both of these involve shifting from the default mode network to the executive network, which is a shift in a healthy antidepressant direction. Now how does this line up with mindfulness? Within the Buddhist tradition, attentional regulation is instrumental to overcoming unhealthy mental habits. Mindfulness uses present moment awareness, again, just that recentering on the breath, to reconnect with attentional processes related to breathing sensations whenever mind wandering is detected. And detected in this case meaning that you realize that your mind has wandered. Meditation involves voluntarily focusing your attention on a particular physical or mental object or the body, the process of breathing. And when mind wandering occurs, practitioners bring the attention back to the intended focus of their attention. So it's a process of shifting attention from mind wandering, as in the default mode network, to a voluntary focus or object of attention, like breathing sensations. One self-monitors, noting that your mental states that are contrary to the focused attention that you want, and try to accept them and return your focus, leaving behind that sort of sleepiness of mental chatter, these other non-focused default mode states. Now, with all of this background, the Hasenkamp study perhaps makes more sense, checking out which parts of the brain, which networks are involved when a person undertakes the different operations of mindfulness. So once again, there's the default mode network, which is mind wandering, self-indulgent, depressogenic thinking. Awareness, where you become aware that your mind has deviated, your focus has left your target. The shift, where you return the focus and recenter yourself. And then the continuation of focus until you begin the circle again. Now there are two other brain networks that are good for us to be familiarized with: the task positive network and the salience network. They're all related. One notices something relevant to the envisioned task, which is the salience network, and then switches attention over to that task, which is the task positive network, with the intention of doing something that advances your life. And with that in mind, we're going to turn our attention to this a study titled Regulation of the Neural Circuitry of Emotion by Compassion Meditation, Effects of Meditative Expertise. This looks very complicated, but consider it like a map of North and South America. We're looking at multiple places in the brain, like the Americas, that seem related to compassion and empathic responding. So these are linked together, and what we want to do is understand these interrelationships within the structures. So recent brain fMRI studies implicate two places, the insula and the anterior cingulate cortex, or cortices. On the map, you can see them highlighted, in the empathic response to another person's pain. Now, this study was undertaken because little is known about the impact of the voluntary generation of compassion. To investigate these questions, brain activity was assessed using fMRI, while novice and expert meditation practitioners generated a loving kindness, compassionate meditation state. This is important because we must start with the subjective state in order to see if we can also observe it objectively from a neurophysiological perspective. So, to probe emotional reactivity, emotional and neutral sounds were presented during meditation and rest periods as a comparison. The participants were all expert meditators with more than 10,000 hours of lifetime meditation experience, and they were compared to novice meditators who had just been trained for a week. The focus of the study was the meditative practice that generates a state where an unconditional feeling of loving kindness and compassion pervades the mind, with the key hypotheses being that concern for others cultivated during meditation would enhance emotional responses to emotional human vocalizations, particularly to negative or distressed vocalizations, and that this affective response, so the emotional response to the distress sounds, would also be modified by the degree of meditation training. Now, three-way interaction was predicted with group by state by valence. That was the groups comparing the lifetime meditators with the novices, the state being mid-meditation versus a rest period, and finally the valence, negative versus positive versus neutral typed vocalizations that were heard. So there was a stronger empathic response to negative rather than positive vocalizations, and there was a stronger response during meditation compared to at rest. And this response was also modulated by expertise. So it was also differential between the experts and the novices. Now, the exposure to the vocalizations that was positive, neutral, or negative were randomly distributed. So the individuals were not prepared for what was going to occur. So as predicted, there was a group by state, by valence interaction in the regions that were critical for empathy, that being the insular cortex and the somatosensory cortex. Experts showed larger increases than novices in their empathy response during meditation versus rest in response to the emotional vocalizations compared to neutral vocalizations. And activation in the insular cortex was a function of the intensity of meditation as verbally reported, which was stronger during the good compared to poor blocks of meditation practice across the two groups. So the experts showed larger increases than novices during meditation compared to rest in response to both positive and negative vocalizations compared to neutral, that they had less emotional intensity in the neutral vocalizations. Activation in the insular cortex was a function of the intensity of meditation, as verbally reported, which was stronger, again, during good versus poor blocks of meditation across the two groups. So this chart records the responses in the anterior insular. The red unbroken line represents the fMRI results of the lifetime meditators as they responded to the negative, neutral, and positive vocalizations. Now, the red broken line represents those same meditators lifetime experience meditators at rest, so not in the middle of a meditation. And the blue solid line are the novice meditators during meditation, and the blue dashed line are the same novice meditators at rest. And what you see here, the colors are the same. So the solid red line are the experienced meditators, the dashed red line are the experienced meditators at rest, and the same repeats for the novice meditators. And this reflects the signal change in the insula. And we're going to talk now about the implications of those changes. So this study aimed to objectively measure states of compassion, which is a fundamental component of healing interactions within the self, and especially within counseling or even peer support, where the therapeutic alliance and trust and empathy are all central. And this is mental health in the form of compassion as an identifiable specific process, which it can be objectively observed as neuronal firings or of different intensities in specific locations in the brain. So as we continue to expand the science in this area, we're going to better understand what areas of the brain participate in these processes for sending compassion outward as well as internally. And this is going to continue improving our understanding of how meditation is beneficial and how we can broaden the use of these techniques and continue to improve them. Thanks very much.